This is my BMW R90 Racer, a bike that you don't really see all too much and a bike that is very uncommon. This bike lives inside of my house and doesn't get ridden all too much, but we're going to be taking it out for a ride today and giving you guys a little bit of a synopsis of what it's like to own this bike, what this bike represents, and the reason why you probably don't know what it is. Let's get into it. BMW came out with their R9T lineup. The R9T basically is the newest variant of BMW's Boxer Twin. They have a numerous amount of models that go underneath that. They have scramblers, they have regular street bikes, and they have this, which is the Racer. The Racer was only made for a few years, introduced in 2017, 18, 19, and after that they stopped making them. In Europe, they had different specifications called the Racer S, but in the United States, we had the option to get the S spec parts, but we didn't have the S model. With the Racer S variant, you get a couple of different things. The biggest and most notable thing is the spoked wheels. They came in two different options, one with cast, one with spoked. These are the spoke wheels. When we were going to buy an R9T, we specifically sought out a spoked wheel variant, and trust me, that was a lot harder than it seems because there were not a lot of these produced. A larger handful, and the bikes that I always see for sale are always the alloy wheel variants and never the spoked variants. Now, I haven't been in the market, but I've only seen 2 or 3 of them for sale when I was looking for them across the entire country. Also, another kind of weird thing, the shock is painted white on this bike. I think it was an option, but it's just something that kind of stands out to me. The Racer was kind of like an instant classic, and let me explain what I mean by that. So this bike has BMW goodies, Brembo brakes, BMW styling, BMW engineering. It rides like a BMW because it is one. And when this bike came out, it didn't really do all too well. It was very expensive. It doesn't appeal to everyone. It's not the most comfortable if you can see how long this bike is and the reach of it. But also, it just didn't stack up to the other offerings that even BMW was offering. And what I mean by that is technology. The only tech this bike really has is ABS, and it has grip warmers. And that's it. There's no traction control, no different mode options, and to a rider, an enthusiast rider, a lot of people were just looking for that at that time, and even still now. Now, this bike isn't really a retro classic, but kind of a shout back to cafe racers of the day, and even the R90S with this fairing in the front. Different style fairing, but kind of similar. But the bike is very sleek and very long. The other part of people not wanting to buy them was the price. And also, if you are someone who's not that tall, someone who's a little bit older or has back problems, then that's the people who have the money. You don't really want to buy the bike. The very first thing you notice is how far away that handlebar actually is. I mean, I'm already getting into a tucked stance, and that's something we'll talk about when we go for a ride as well, just the overall stance fit. Now, the older people have the money, and the older people probably don't want to sit like this with their 1 or 2 motorcycles that they might own. They rather prefer other R90 variants, and the younger generation, I feel like this bike didn't really appeal to those people, because they would rather go buy the S1000 or perhaps some different sport bike. More power, more tech, just more bang for the buck than the R90 Racer. But it doesn't look like the R90 Racer. Normally, I mean, the shifter would probably be all the way up here and the brake lever would be all the way up here. But how far tucked back those are, just because, once again, this bike was made to be a cafe racer style variant of the R9T, and I mean, they did a phenomenal job. The seating position is awesome. I mean, you don't get uncomfortable when you ride the bike, but I could totally understand, and people just saw the bike and were like, maybe not for me. When you go take it out for a ride, it does get less and less intimidating and less uncomfortable the more you do ride it. Those were kind of the reasons why the bike didn't do all too well. They made them for a few years, they produced a few thousand of them, and then no one talks about them anymore. This is a bone stock bike. It only has 1,600 miles on it, and overall, I mean, it's in fantastic condition. Obviously, it's a new bike. It's a horizontally opposed Boxer Twin, as all the R BMWs are. This bike is an 1100 and makes about 115 horsepower. Monoshock in the rear, and of course, BMW's signature with the R models, the shaft drive. It has clip-ons in the front. This awesome fairing that BMW put on these bikes that was only exclusive to the Racer. This awesome cowl in the rear that was once again only exclusive to the Racer. The seat, I believe, was only used in the Racer. The tank, the frame, the motor, all of those things were taken from the R9T and then added the Racer parts onto it. I took this bike to the racetrack the other day. I rode it on the track, and I had a ton of people coming up to me and asking me questions of how I like the bike, that they've never seen one. This is the first time they've seen one in the wild. and I've never seen another one other than this one right here. The bike does need its yearly maintenance. Change the oil, the filter, look through the bike, make sure everything is in proper running order and running condition. You need to maintain them, you need to run through them, you need to start them, and they like to be run through. Machines don't like to sit, and I'm aware of that. Even though this is one of the bikes that I don't use too much, I still use it. It just sits pretty most of the year, unfortunately. With all of those things being said, that's a little bit of the spec synopsis and what the bike is all about. What really this bike is about is the riding experience, which you guys bully me that I don't do enough. So let's go out and ride it.
So today, I've decided to take the BMW out for a little ride. I've driven this bike a little bit now. Over the course of the last few weeks, I've put about 100 miles or so on it. But I'm excited to just go for a little ride today, give you guys some impressions about this bike, because it has been a while since I've actually used it. So let's do it. You need to get out on the open road because it's pretty hot sitting in full gear, just baking in the sun, especially when my gear is black. But what is fun is this bike right here. It has a service light on it because it needs its yearly service, which I will be doing at some point in the near future here. It's just oil, maybe like some other weird thing, but it's probably just an oil change that it's requiring, even though it has not hit the mileage for even one oil change. This bike only has about 1,500, 1,600 miles on it at the moment. Drive it a few hundred miles a year at the very most. Some of you guys say, that's not enough riding. You know, what's the point of having a motorcycle? You guys gotta keep in mind, I have quite a few motorcycles, so I can't ride them all at the same time. And this is one of those bikes that I don't choose to ride on a daily basis, but choose to keep for special occasions. But when I do get on this bike, it's always so fun. And one of the biggest reasons is because it's a hard bike to ride. Right? This bike is not just something you can hop around and just kind of do your normal thing and putz around the neighborhood. This bike, it's an event to ride it. And by that I mean it's not simple whatsoever. This bike has such a weird, unique stance. Like, if you're someone who is shorter, you would be very uncomfortable on this motorcycle. Now, I'm kind of sprawled out on this bike. I'm pretty comfortable, and the more I get seat time on this bike, the more comfortable I become with it. This wasn't a bike that's just instant, like, oh, I love this thing right off the bat. It definitely took a little bit to get used to it and really understand how it rides. But the first thing you do notice, it is a little intimidating to get on, but cornering wise, balance wise, weight wise, this bike is balanced incredibly. And I know I've said that about a few bikes I've rode recently, but just because of the way I think the motor sits so low, it is a very easy bike to place when you're in the corners. But it's one of the more intimidating bikes to kind of just sit on. The handlebars all the way down here, all the way over this long tank, and you're seated pretty far back on the motorcycle, so it kind of gives a sense of almost like you're in a tuck basically at all times. You can't really sit up on the bike because the handlebars are so low. But once you kind of get over the initial fear factor the bike brings in because of that stance, you realize how effortless everything else is. If you're someone who can comfortably ride like this, or someone who is tall enough to ride like this, I mean, if you're over 5'10", if you're average height, you should be fine. It's not a bike that you need to be like 6'3" to ride. But, I mean, a shorter person is definitely going to have to be more leaned over the motorcycle. And it's definitely not something that is very comfortable. I've seen some fellow owners in my comment section talk about the bike and talk about how over time, as they become more comfortable with the motorcycle, they've kind of grown to appreciate the stance and the seating position. I love the seating position, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely more demanding than a lot of other motorcycles. But because of how long the bike is, it is incredible to put into corners. It gives a very balanced and planted view. Effortless to put into corners. I rode the Hawk, my NT650, in the last video, and I said the same thing about that bike. that bike is so effortless to put into corners that you can get an incredible amount of angle in a corner. And the same thing is with this bike. It is very, very effortless to put into corners. And as someone who might be a little bit newer to really getting down into a corner with a ton of angle, this bike wants you to do it. Now, I wouldn't say this is a beginner bike. It's actually pretty hard to ride, not because of its power, but because of the stance with the bike and how comfortable you can become with it, and also this clutch. I don't know, I've never been a fan of BMW clutches. Even in my car, I just don't care for the clutch all too much. Leaving first gear always feels like I'm slipping it, and I've kind of started to get a little bit used to it since I have rode it a few times this year. But it always does feel on leaving first gear like it's slipping the clutch. Every time else, I mean, it feels like you can punch through the clutch, which is great. A little lightweight clutch, no problems. But just like leaving first gear here, got it effortlessly that time. But usually you feel the clutch kind of like bite in a weird way, and it makes you feel a little uncomfortable. Something to get used to, I suppose.
Well, there you guys have it. A short little ride with my BMW R90 Racer, a little bit of a review, and my thoughts on this bike so far.